Addressing the issue of foreign-owned farmland in the United States of America. That's the problem, and that's also what we're talking about in this episode of The Business of Agriculture. Hey, Damian Mason here with a question before we hop into this episode of The Business of Agriculture. If you farm for a living, you employ a lot of amazing technology, from your inputs that you put into the soil to the tractor that you sit in, your combine, and the amazing data that it harvests. But has your soil analytics kept up technologically with everything else in your farming operation? I would venture to say that no, it is not. Sure, you check for your nitrogen, your phosphorus, your potassium, your micronutrients as well. But what about disease pressure? Do you know what diseases and what pests you're going to face next year? No, you don't. But you can now figure that out with Pattern Ag's predictive analytics. Think about it. They can tell you now with testing what the likelihood of facing nasty diseases, things like cyst nematode or sudden death syndrome, what the likelihood of you having this in your field. Then you know how to prepare, how to treat, and where to invest your money. It's using technology to make you bigger yields and therefore make you bigger money. Go to www.pattern.ag to learn more. They are pioneering the way in predictive agronomy. Hey there, welcome to another fantastic episode of The Business of Agriculture. I've got a great topic for you today because a number of you have asked me to address it, and you know what? I answer to you because I want this to be a show that you want to dial into, but more importantly, I want it to be something I dial into. This is a compelling subject, and it's a big topic that I think is wrought with peril. Foreign entities owning farm property in the United States of America. Generally, it's not a big deal. Canada, the Netherlands, Germany, those entities, individuals, or companies from those countries own farmland. A lot of it's forest land, not a big deal. But what about adversaries? What about countries that don't just want to be here as an investors and participate in the American dream? They want to be here to destroy the American dream. And that's what we're talking about today. I've got Kendell Culp. He is a farmer and also a state representative in my home state of Indiana. If you're watching and not listening, that's my state right there over my shoulder, a map of Indiana. Anyway, he's from Jasper County, which is I'd call it about 80 miles due west of Huntington, Indiana, roughly, and maybe a little northwest. And he's the only farmer in the Indiana General Assembly. He has also put together a bill, or he can talk about the politics of it, to limit and restrict foreign ownership of farmland in the state of Indiana. Right now, we have no federal policy at all on this. There have been calls for that. Some states, it tends to be more conservative, agricultural type states, are pushing their own restrictions on foreign ownership, particularly from adversarial countries. So I said, man, Kendell, you got to come on here. Here he is. Mr. Culp, tell me about the problem and then tell me about the legislation that you've put together.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I'm a freshman legislator in Indiana's General Assembly. And so this issue came up last year when I had a bill about inventorying the amount of farmland we've lost in Indiana to all uses. And the question was asked to me then, well, what about a foreign ownership of farmland and about losing that? Is this bill pertaining to that? I said, no, it's not. But I said, it's a great topic. I said, I'll work on that during the summer. So came back with the bill this year. It's House Bill 1183. And basically, we identify farmland, what that definition is, and we identify who foreign adversaries are. And the bill just absolutely prohibited all foreign adversaries of the U.S. from purchasing Indiana farmland. So the genesis behind this was a food security bill. And we know that if we lose even just a fraction of our food production to other foreign interests, then it can quickly become a national security issue. So that's how we started out with the bill. It ended up a little different than where we started from, but it strictly was about agriculture and farmland. And it passed. The first vote out of the state house was out of the House of Representatives was 97-0 to support this bill.
Well, it's good to know that in a state like Indiana, we have good support, and we hear about stuff going on in South Dakota and North Dakota and all that. Let's talk about let's go ahead and go off of what you just said, and then let's go bigger picture to the whole country. So the way this came up was that you said, are we losing farm ground? And I guess that probably means to development, to urban sprawl, to that sort of thing. That's something that we hear a lot about that I think is not as big of an issue as we're losing 23 acres an hour or something like that. I don't know I'm not convinced that that's something that's to be that worried about, but I do get a little concerned when we're losing it to solar panels. In a state like Indiana that only gets sunshine about 150 days a year. What was the impetus for that, and then the finding from that then gave you the spur about the foreign ownership?
Sure. Well, the Indiana State Department of Agriculture is conducting the survey, the inventory, and they are back by the end of June of this year. So they haven't put together. They've told me they haven't got it all dissected yet. So we don't know exactly what that's going to show. Although they are telling me, obviously, there is obviously a loss. We'll have to determine how significant that is. But the other part of that is it will determine what the loss was to. Was it to renewable energy that you talked about? Was it to residential development or industry or warehouses or whatever that may be? Because we know that you're going to lose some farmland to development. And obviously, we need to lose some of it to development to help support agriculture and the new technologies that come forth. So we understand that. And so that was kind of the background of that. And then once we got to looking at foreign interest, as you know, Canada is the largest in the U.S., the largest owner of a foreign country. And, we're not too concerned, I don't think, by and large, about Canada. It's got a huge unprotected border between, Canada and the U.S. And so, but when you really delve into that and you look at those adversarial countries, and by the way, we're going off of the U.S. Department of Commerce's, their definition of an adversarial country. So today, that's China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, Cuba, and Venezuela. And those are the 6 countries that they consider adversarial. And I did not want really Indiana government to be able to add and subtract from that list. I want to try to, as much as we can, take the politics out of that. And when you're talking about foreign or about national security, our federal government is well positioned to determine who's our friends and who's our foe. And so that's kind of the impetus of that. We can argue about the federal government and their role, but there's one area where I think they should have a good understanding. And when you look at this right now, there's 24 states that have some sort of legislation limiting foreign ownership of their either farmland or property in the U.S. And so we had our first bill here in Indiana in 2022. So this built upon that and really went quite a bit further than that. But this really should be a national policy. But unfortunately, they're not able to get anything passed in Congress right now other than continuing funding resolutions, it seems to be. But I did work with Senator Braun, Indiana Senator Braun. He has legislation submitted, as does Senator Tester from Montana and Senator Rounds from South Dakota. And so they're working on a comprehensive bill. So I worked with his office to try to get the language where we need to be on this.
All right, let's go through a couple things there. Thank you. Great overview. About a couple things you just said there, Mr. Culp. You said, first off, that discussion on designating the countries. Yeah, you could see where Texas, if they came with a bill, might say, well, you know what? Mexico's not doing enough to stop this flood of immigrants. By God, they're an adversarial country. You went with what? The Department of Defense or with the federal government's, and there's, I can't imagine any logical. We know those aren't the majority sometimes. Any logical person would say, oh, why did you put Cuba or Venezuela on there or North Korea? China's the one that's getting China's the one that's getting the attention now, or the one that people send me and like say, hey, Damian, what's going on with China? So I understand the 6 countries, China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, Venezuela, Cuba. That's perfect. Then the other one that you just said was 24 states are doing this, and because the federal government is not. Is this kind of the same thing? We're not going to make this a political show, but we got a federal government that right now, and frankly, a White House and administration that is doing nothing about the migrant thing, that like 70% of the population in this country says, for God's sakes, this is a problem, and they're doing absolutely nothing other than, passing and blaming politics, whatever. You think it's the same thing? You think if it was a different administration that led from the top, that this wouldn't be something that we're talking about state to state? It would be, no, it's going to be a federal policy. You don't own any agricultural land if you're from these 6 countries?
Well, from what I've seen in Indiana, I think if you had the right people pushing this administratively in Washington, you could get something passed. because this has received absolute unanimous bipartisan support in Indiana. And who wants to get out in front of the freight train and say, oh, we're not too concerned about China here in Indiana. It's all right if they want to come in. I mean, nobody's going to say that. And my intent wasn't to put people in a bad spot. Let's do the right thing for the right reasons. And everybody is agreeing this is the right thing. And people can point and they say, well, in Indiana, China just owns a few hundred acres. All right, we want to keep it that way.
Yeah, well, that's still a few hundred. That's a few hundred acres too many, is what you would say.
Exactly.
So let's talk about Indiana, and then we'll take a big broad acre across the country. China only owns a couple hundred acres in Indiana. What do they even own?
So they basically, it's a part of what they own. So Syngenta, which is owned by ChemChina, owns, I don't know, 110 or 120 acres in the Fort Wayne area, is my understanding, in the northeast part of the state, and so some other sprinklings of around the state. So not a lot. And like I said, that's the way we want to keep it. But there's influence all over the place from, I mean, currently in Indiana, now think about this, our state Department of Economic Development, IEDC, is courting 11, and count them, 11 Chinese companies to locate in Indiana today. As we speak, they're talking to that many companies, and they could be located throughout the state in industrial parks or wherever. And some of these, we just don't know. I mean, when you get these companies, one of them is a corn milling plant. Yeah. Well, I'm a corn farmer. That'd be great to have another market for 25 million bushel of corn. But when you look at the background and you look at the parent company that has close ties with the CCP, I mean, we're not just talking about China. We're talking about communist China, and I think that's really important. And I tell you, when I'm out and about in the community, and I had several bills moving through the State House this year, and they'll say, "How's your bill?" Well, I know, I don't have to ask them which one. I know which one they're talking about. They're talking about the one to ban foreign adversaries from owning farmland, because it is top of mind for not only Hoosiers, but I think Americans right now in general.
So in case you forgot by now, this is Kendell Culp. He's a state representative from the northwest part of Indiana and the Indiana General Assembly, and he's the only full-time farmer that's in the General Assembly, which is another problem we all have about representation. And we're talking about restricting foreign ownership, and I really think that this is something that its time has come, or maybe it's past time. I got a bunch of questions to talk to you about who owns what and how we're going to address that. Before I do that, I want to tell you about my new sponsor, Redox. Redox Bionutrients is a family business with products for ag and turf that are increasingly applied to acres in the United States and even internationally. Okay, let's face it. You listen to my show, you know we talk about these things, dear listener. There's been a boatload of money pour into biologicals in the last several years. Ag tech and biologicals is where everybody and their sister was a venture capital fund or a wannabe investor dump money in there, billions of monies. A bunch of these products have no proven track record. Redox has been around for 30 years. A guy named Darren Moon started his company 30 years ago in specialty crop and then moved into turf. Now he wants you to experiment and understand that his products can work for you on your broad acre type crops. They've been around for 30 years. 30 years. So they got a proven track record. Redox Bionutrients provide superior nutrition, abiotic stress defense, root growth, soil health, and efficient nutrient uptake. Find out more at redoxgrows.com. Redox, R-E-D-O-X, grows.com. I've been to their facility in Burley, Idaho. They've got good research. They've got R&D going on. I suggest you give them a look. Redox. Okay. In the state of Indiana, there's a couple hundred acres owned by China. And when we say owned by China, this is the thing. It's like, no, is it really owned by China as a company? Well, in China, there's such an intertwined relationship with the Chinese Communist Party and the corporations and the investor class. The elites in a country where only 8% of the whole population is a member of the Chinese Communist Party, generally those that are at the top of the pecking order financially and economically are also very much in bed with, because they have to be, the Chinese Communist Party. It's not that way necessarily with investors from Canada owning some forest land up in Maine. It's not that way with the Netherlands, okay? Some of that Netherlands, our Dutch people came here and set up dairy farms. They're probably not here with sinister, with the wrong intentions. China does definitely bring up your red flag, and that's what you're talking about here. 11 companies being courted in our state of Indiana by the Indiana Economic Development Corporation. To the person listening to this that's in Nebraska, hell, it could be the same thing there. That's the thing. It's not just an Indiana thing. It's a United States thing. If Chinese companies want to come and set up a manufacturing facility, you'd say, oh, that's great. But maybe it's not, given their track record. And sure as hell, if we want to be involved in this agricultural business and mill corn, you're getting some arrows right now. You've got some people coming after you, Kendell, because they're saying, wait a minute, you're a farm guy. They want to come here and mill corn. You think it's a little more shady than that?
Well, again, where this company wants to locate, and the company's name is Fufang, and you may not recognize the name, but you will recognize, I think, the fact that this is the same company that was tossed out of North Dakota last year that was locating within 12 miles of the Grand Forks U.S. Air Force Base. And so they were looking, they actually purchased over 400 acres there to locate on. They had it zoned and annexed by the town. So they were all set to go. And there was so much pressure put on the governor and the local decision makers that they rescinded that and didn't issue any permits. So they're looking at other places for that. And so they've looked in Minnesota, they've looked in Illinois. I understand they're looking in Ohio. And so they've located this spot. This is in a former ordnance plant. In World War II, they made bombs in this plant, and it's an adjoining county to me. And so you think about that. There's two major railroad spurs that go through that property. It's a 10,000 acre development, and so it's been planned for development since the 1950s, and so that's great. And they've always looked for that big anchor project, is what they tell me. So in comes Fufang, and they're like, we want to plant our flag here. This is in the Corn Belt. This is corn country. We want to use 25 million bushel a year, and believe me, we need more markets for our corn. And I'm a corn farmer. And so local farmers are saying, well, wait a minute, why this bill is going to inhibit us from letting them develop it. But you know what? This isn't about me individually. This isn't about any individual. This is still about national security. Now, you got to remember, they're a stone's throw away from Lake Michigan. They're close to the largest oil refinery in the U.S., British Petroleum, in Whiting, Indiana, which is just on the other side of Chicago. And so logistically, I'm sure there's a lot of good reasons why they want to locate there. And that's concerning as well. I mean, we've heard from the U.S. Air Force, Department of Air Force, that says that they are concerned about their location when it was in North Dakota, being that close to military base. So the second part of this bill, which we haven't talked about yet, and I think it's pertinent to bring that up right now, is when this bill passed out of the House, the chamber that I'm a member of, it was just about protecting farmland. When it moved to the Senate side, it took on a new life, and they said, we want to protect our military installations in Indiana. And we actually put a 10-mile circle around every National Guard facility, every base, every military installation in Indiana, state or federal, and put a 10-mile circle around it and said, if you are an adversary country, you cannot purchase any real estate within that 10-mile, not just farmland. So it went much beyond food security at that point. Now we became a full-fledged national security bill. And again, it was met with unanimous consent in the Senate to do that. Now, there was pushback from the economic development community, as you can imagine. They didn't like that. There's Association for the Local Economic Development Organizations, the State Economic Development Organization. None of them like to be withheld. But if you go out to the public and you talk to real people, this is a real concern of theirs, and they're very supportive of that safety net.
So the question would be, yeah, that's good. This is where I'm sure that our listeners are sitting here saying, well, wait a minute. First it was farm ground, and now it's also industrial facilities or facilities within distance to this. What about just blanket? If you're Chinese, you're owning nothing in the state of Indiana. Well, then the economic development people are going to say, well, we want them to come here because they'll put in a factory. And I still kind of call bullshit on this, Kendell. When you've got, labor rates in China of a few dollars an hour, why do they want to be pushing manufacturing back into the United States? So I called it, I could see a Trojan horse argument to be made here. We really want to believe that they so desperately want our labor pool that they're going to pay 7 times as much for it and be here. I think there's very much a Trojan horse argument you made for this, that you could say, we don't want Chinese ownership of anything on our soil.
So we had in the Senate testimony, we had Brian Kavanaugh flew out from Washington. He was on the Trump National Security Council. And so he came out and talked about not just China, but each one of those adversarial countries. And it was really interesting to hear him talk about North Korea and Russia and Iran and what they have financially to ability to do that, what they have in technology and surveillance to be able to do that. But he said China understands our economy and they're in for the long game. Mm-hmm. So you almost don't even know they're here, and that's a little bit scary too. But he said they figured out what it's going to do to influence and have an influx with our national security is you're going to have to start investing in the United States, and you're going to do that over time. And so you think about, I mean, they own Smithfield, right? Well, our largest pork packing plant. So they're already deeply involved in our food chain here in the United States. And so again, the more dependent you get on other countries, I mean, that's the concerning part. Then people say, well, look at all the soybeans we sell. That's right. We sell them. Half of our export of soybeans goes to Canada, or goes to China. So we're buying those for cash, but they're leaving the country, going to them, right? So we're producing it here and it's going there. They're bringing the workplace, the factories here, their investment is here. And if you follow the money trail a little bit, that's what's concerning too. So they're bringing the investment here. So all the proceeds are leaving, the profits are leaving the United States, right? I mean, we're funding, we're providing jobs. That's great. There's people are paying taxes, but the proceeds are leaving. We're taking state tax dollars that are given from our state budget to our Economic Development Corporation in Indiana. They're using that to attract new development to come into the state. Now, whether that's from another development from another state to get them to here, or to locate like out of the country, like this, for example. So we're using tax dollars to incent them to come in. And then we could even talk about if we have a big issue in Indiana right now is water quantity. And so we've got this new big development north of Indianapolis that the state has started, which purchased up to 10,000 acres of great farmland. And we're putting industry in, which I understand, but there's no water there. So now if we're going to pay to bring water from one community to another, we're going to give them our water. I mean, it's not too hard to see the circle going on here. And that's why Hoosiers and specifically are really upset about what's going on.
Yeah, and I understand that, and you understand that. And the thing is, it's always that. This is where I actually point. It's a similar vein when I speak at my agricultural functions, and I say, I get it. You want to grow soybeans, and you're so damned excited. China's going to buy our soybeans. I said, at what point do you not realize you're making a little bit of money on soybeans, but you're also funding your adversary, or you're feeding your adversary? And I said, trust me, they don't want to be our customer long term. They want to be our replacement. They don't want to be our soybean customer 5 years from now. That's why they're using economic colonialism to go to third world countries and build infrastructure to extract resources. Right. This has been done before. It was done usually more at the point of a musket, but now it's being done over dollars or wands or whatever the currency might be. They're not going to be our customer 10 years from now. They're not. I promise you, China will not be our customer 10 years from now. Unfortunately, they might be in charge of us 10 years from now at the pace they're going. But it's very short-sighted to think, oh, man, China, they put a milling plant in here. I've been on the anti-China parade for a long time. I've been leading it. Hell, I'm the drum major of the anti-China parade because it's not very popular in agriculture, Kendell, and you know this, to go out and talk bad about China because China, okay, so they bought Smithfield, but you know what? We're making 50% more pork than we did 30 years ago. We're sending pork overseas. 25-30% of our pork goes overseas now. We were a net importer 30 years ago. So it's not very popular to be the drum major in the anti-China parade. The problem is there's not enough people that want to be in the parade because they still think that somehow more demand. And now the economic development people, to your point, think, yeah, but they want to put in these facilities. No, I really think that we've got to. Other countries would not allow this.
Correct. Well, and here's the thing. If you are another country, what incents an American to do something they want you to do? And it usually has to do with money, finances, right? So they're incenting us they'll develop here. We'll hire your Americans to operate the plants. and there's going to be all this profit. And you think about that. So there was a lot of pushback at the state level to exempt any land that was zoned industrial. Now you think about that. So when you look about where Fufeng was wanting to locate here in Indiana, again, since the 50s, that property has been zoned industrial. They've tried to they've put aside the ordinance part, and they're trying to now redevelop that. Okay, what have they done since the 50s though? They farmed that ground to produce income. It does two things. It produces income, and it keeps your assessment at ag rate instead of industrial rate, which is a big difference in Indiana. Yeah. So they've taken all the financial benefits, and now when they have a chance to sell a few hundred acres for this big development, they're saying, well, this isn't farmland. This really isn't farmland. It's really industrial land. And I'm like, well, no, you don't go by zoning, you go by use. Mm-hmm. You are producing corn or soybeans on this ground. Well, yeah, but that's just until we get it developed for another use.
It's been 70 years.
It's 70 years. And so, okay, which side are you going to be on here? And so that's part of the problem is we identified farmland as any land that has had agricultural activity within the last 5 years, or if the USDA's Farm Service Agency recognizes it as farmland. So if it had a farm number on it, which that ground does, then that is considered farmland. That is not industrial land. Yeah. If you want to lay fallow for 5 years, but the owner's not going to do that. They're trying to get income off of it. So I'm back to the point where they tempt us with money. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, Americans are easily tempted with those dollars. But I'm telling you, the farmers that I talk to outside of that particular area, they know that this is a problem. Mm-hmm. And when President Trump put on the tariffs on steel and aluminum, we knew that the retaliation was going to come back against soybean farmers. And the president said, well, I'll have your back. And he did have our back. Yeah. And I was concerned about a pushback from farmers to saying, oh my gosh, this is our big market. What are we going to do? No, that was not their thought. Their thought was it's about time somebody stands up to them and does the right thing. And if that means I make less, I'll make less because it's the right thing to do for the United States.
Yeah, it's interesting. So you and I both are in agreement on this. I would take a short-term financial hit versus a long-term being forced to speak Mandarin. And I've been one of the few people in agriculture that keeps warning that this, it's neat. You like it now because it gave you. We're making 50% more soybeans now than we did just at Y2K. Kendall, you know this. You're a farmer. 50%. Where the hell do you think that all went? It went to China. Great, wonderful. Right. But also we funded our enemy. We fueled and funded and fueled and fed our enemy. Let's talk about how big the problem is, because that's what I get calls about, and I get questions when I'm speaking at stuff. In the state of Indiana, China's not even got a foothold yet, thank goodness. Germany, I think you said, and it's not Germany, yes, the country. It's investors or companies from Germany that own, right, and it's agricultural land.
Yeah, about 83,000 acres. That's owning or leasing of Indiana land by Germany, and actually Italy's number 2 with 33,000. And so you think about that. The Netherlands is third, and then we come up with Canada, which in a lot of states Canada would be the largest, but not in Indiana because, as you said, a lot of that is timberland.
Yeah. So what do you think the German? And again, it's not the country Germany. It's investors, right, or companies from Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, individuals. Like I said, my farm is rented to a man that is now an American citizen, but 24 years ago, when they came to the United States from the Netherlands, they would have been classified as Netherlands owners of farm ground. But it was to rent. It was to make milk. They sold their assets in the Netherlands. It came to milk cows.
I think it's important. It's important to note, though, that those 4 countries that I named, the top 4 countries, none of those are adversarial countries. So Absolutely. There is a differentiation here of those 6 adversarial countries do not make our top 4 list, and I think that's really important as we go forward. But renewable energy is up and coming and takes up and leases a lot of farmland in Indiana. I don't know if Germany. I don't know if there's German investment in some of those. That's a possibility. Again, I'm not passing judgment on renewable energy, but I'm saying if you break it down by counties, and by far and away the county in Indiana with the largest amount of foreign owned or leased ground is White County. White County is in my legislative district. I live right next to it. It's the top solar, or it's the top wind county in Indiana, renewable county. It has over 500 turbines. Yeah. And so that's easy for me to juggle. The second one is Randolph County over on the Ohio border. They have a lot of wind turbines, a lot of solar panels. So I think when you look at that, that's where a lot of this outside influence is coming from.
Yeah, and those are probably not farmers in Germany or Italy. They would be investor companies or investors saying, hey, here's a place to get some return. The United States is tossing tax dollars around at renewable energy. So let's go and buy farm ground that has windmills on them for leases. So I can see that as well. Nationally, the problem, and because again, we get asked about this. I'm sure you get asked about it. And I want you to tell me about the 24 states here in a second. Before I do that, let's pull some numbers from the American Farm Bureau Federation, because the problem is the ascent. Right now, China owns almost nothing in terms of owned farmland in the United States, and it's mostly through Smithfield. Do you have any data on that, Kendell? Because
actually, in the United States, China has about 400,000 acres. Now, I don't know exactly which state that's in.
North Carolina has a bunch because of the Smithfield and the pork thing. There's also Texas. According to this American Farm Bureau Federation report, in Texas, there's a whole big chunk that's owned by a Chinese billionaire. Again, is he affiliated with the Chinese Communist Party? Probably, because I don't know how you aren't when you're a big player there. And it was allegedly for wind or oil or something, for energy development. So North Carolina, Texas, and Missouri, because Smithfield has, based on the Murphy Brown affiliation, I think it is on pork. So I think the big holdings of the 400,000 that you're talking about by Chinese owners, Missouri, North Carolina, Texas, gobble up the bulk of those acres, I think. I'm pulling the data right now. Go ahead.
Yeah. And so that's a big concern. If you look at nationwide, about 40 million acres are owned by foreign countries or entities within foreign countries. Now, that's not all adversarial countries, but for 40, I mean, we've got about 1.3 billion acres. And so 40 million, you say, well, that's not a lot. Well, look at that. I mean, that's a big chunk. And again, a lot of that is in the western states, timberland, for example. And there's a good example. And I actually, in my research, I did call Senator Tester's office. He's a Montana U.S. senator. And there's a lot of concern out there. Again, he has some legislation federally, because what's happening is some of these Chinese companies will go to Canada and they'll establish an LLC in Canada. And then that LLC will cross the border into Indiana or into the United States, and in this case, in Missouri and in Montana, and they'll purchase timberland, and then they'll strip the land, cut the timber, export it back to China, yep. and it's like, well, who's the wiser? So yep. We tried to address that within our legislation to identify who. I mean, in these shell companies, we don't know who are these people, and we really don't know.
That's, by the way, that's one of the biggest concerns, because we ran through the numbers. And I want to get to those numbers, and I want to get to your concerns, because if we say, well, Canada is the biggest owner, well, investors or companies from Canada are the biggest owners of American farmland or agricultural land, which includes forestry. You'd say, oh, well, they're Canadian. Well, also, what if it's the Fang of Canada? It just means Chinese money went to Canada and set up an LLC, and now it's operating as Canada Land Investors LLC. That's my concern. By the way, I got to pay some bills here. Okay. Real quickly, before we get back with Kendell Culp talking about this, a great discussion. I know you're enjoying it. If you want to diversify revenue on your acres, if you are a farmland owner, operator, let's face it, it's going to get a little skinny in 2024, 25% down from last year, 40% down from the year 2022 in terms of net farm income. Those are USDA projections. You need to diversify revenue. What if you could do that by getting paid for practices you're already doing? Strip till, reduced till, maybe some cover cropping. Truterra can help you with this. I'm wearing their hat right now. It's a company called Truterra. They've been around for only a few years, but don't worry about that. They are part of Land O'Lakes, which has been around for more than 100 years. Truterra is focused on supporting farmers at every stage of the sustainability journey to help you with your regenerative management practices to improve your agronomic, but more importantly, your economic sustainability. There's no legacy. There's no farm for grandkids if you're going broke. So you know what? Look at maybe diversifying your revenue, and Truterra can help you with that for sustainability practices. Go to truterraag.com. Truterra, Truterra, truterraag.com. All right. Yeah. So that's the one thing is the Chinese are certainly capable of being shady, sneaky, adversarial. Are we convinced that some of this Canada ownership isn't really Chinese ownership coming through Canada?
Yeah, I think that's for sure is what's happening. And so that, I mean, we can't take the Chinese for granted and their intelligence. I mean, they figured out, I think, how they can penetrate into the United States, and they're doing that through some of these shell companies and shell corporations. And we've got buying groups all over, and here in Indiana, buying groups buy farmland, and who is behind the name of those buying groups, and we really don't know. And hopefully now this will help identify them, because we've given the enforcement of this to our Indiana's Attorney General. And
okay, so that's what I say. How do you track? You and I both are in full agreement. You must be smart like a Purdue guy, because you're always about the money, the money, money. So here's the thing. Are you a Purdue guy?
I am.
Imagine that. It's, money's fungible. And all of a sudden, it could be washed a number of ways over here. How the hell are we going to know if I'm at the auction that our friend Howard Halderman's company is putting on, and I'm trying to buy this 80-acre chunk of ground, and I'm bidding against just some dude that looks like me, but he's also representing Land Acquisitions of the World, LLC. Where'd that money come from? How are you going to track this?
So we had a lot of discussion, and there were several amendments, and actually that's the one part of the bill I guess I wish we were a little stronger on. But we started out by saying that you would have to, upon closing of any real estate transaction in Indiana, once this becomes law, you would have to sign an affidavit upon closing. You sign a mountain of paperwork anyway, paperwork. And so this will be one more, guaranteeing that you do not fit the definition of an adversarial person. And if that was found to be falsified, and that could be done by a whistleblower or anybody, then the Attorney General would take that. They would do their investigation. The Attorney General told us, if this becomes law, we don't need a document signed that says we're following the law, and we can investigate and we can prosecute. And so we've set that forward. And one thing they did do, the Senate also added in here, the Attorney General was concerned that if those companies forfeited that farmland that they bought because they were found out to be fraudulent, and then it would go into receivership. But they were concerned that we'd have to return the dollars back to the foreign adversary after they bought the land that falsified it. Well, we changed that, and the Senate said, no, nothing doing. If they falsify that document, if they say we're not a foreign adversary, and they're found out that they are through the court system, then they would forfeit those dollars, and those dollars would go back to the state general fund. So they would not get their money back for the property that they purchased, and then the state would sell that to someone rightfully owner, a rightful owner that met the qualifications. So I don't know if that's going to be a deterrent or not, but I can guarantee you, in talking to our Attorney General in his office right now, he's anxious to enforce this piece of legislation.
What about, well, by the way, that opens up the other can of worms. Now, what if all of a sudden this legislation, gets going, and then it's like they decide that somehow I'm not, can they come after me? Can they forcibly liquidate my stuff? Because that's the others. You want legislation. You and I are sensible. We're ag guys. We want to protect our national sovereignty. But also, I don't want to give the Attorney General of the state of Indiana the ability to, wake up one day and say, you know what, that Damian Mason put something on social media that pissed me off. I'm going to liquidate his farms and say he's a threat. He's an adversarial threat.
So that's another thing this bill does. It goes forward. It is not retroactive. So anything you own up until the effective date, which if this gets signed, it will be July the 1st. Anything before is they can't take that away from you. Now, Arkansas, for example, theirs was retroactive. Now, there was a bill introduced this year, did not get a hearing, that would have been retroactive. I know there's a representative that's going to come back next year with a kind of a comprehensive China bill. And we'll see whether he puts that back in or not. what I found out in legislation is you've got to take things kind of in bite size. Now, this was again a popular piece of legislation, but man, we ran into a buzzsaw in the Senate trying to get the wording just right of the receivership and how that's all handled with the affidavit and the military part. So I said, let's start with this and let's go forward with this. We'll protect what we can protect now, and then in coming sessions, if that continues to be an issue, then we can always look back, because that is a concern. If you've been here for 30 years and you have some foreign investment in your company that's from an adversarial country, and let's face it, who's on the list now maybe wasn't on the list 15 years ago when that property was bought. So I think you have to be realistic about that. So I think we're in a good spot as a look forward piece of legislation.
That's where I wanted to go also. Are you okay? There's 24 other states that already have something like this in place. You pushed the one. Do you think it would have gotten introduced in Indiana if it weren't for you? The only farmer, and I mean, what is the economic development people would have just been, hey, kumbaya, more money's pouring in here. Yeah, it's Chinese money. Without you, would this have happened?
Well, there were no other bills talked about protecting Indiana farmland this year. So no, I mean, I don't think anybody was that directly focused on the food security piece. When you think about that, and then we've got this big, like I said, this big water issue. So I also threw in this bill, they cannot own or lease any water rights, mineral rights, and riparian rights in Indiana as well. We just as well protect them. When you think about our natural resources, why in the world would we want some adversarial country to get control of that? You talked earlier about selling food to an adversary or selling grain. I mean, look at what our federal government did. They were selling U.S. produced oil, of all things, to Russia. And what did Russia do? They invaded Ukraine.
Yeah.
And so you've got to be so careful about what you do. And who you deal with. There's nothing wrong with having trading partners. If they're adversaries, we'll take their money in exchange for a product we grow it here, we send it to you. Okay, I understand that. But to let someone into our energy production, and that's part of the impetus of why I thought about the food security, is we've worked so hard all of my life, we have never been energy independent in this country. We finally got to where we're energy independent. And that's how quickly the change of administration in Washington, how quickly that can change. Just that quickly, we shut off production here and we started selling some of our strategic reserve oil, again, to an adversary. What do? To use that and turn around and invade a democracy.
You're going to come on the show again, because my entire growing up, when I played with my Matchbox toys and my Hot Wheel toys, and I loved cars when I was a kid, and then I would get told, "Oh, it's so bad, Damian," because I used to say, when I grow up, I'm going to have a Mustang, I'm going to have an El Camino SS, and they'd say, "Oh, that's so cute, little boy. We won't even have cars because we're not going to have any fuel." We heard that in the 1970s, and then we invented the energy department so we could have it. We had attained energy independence 10 years ago, 8 years ago, and it's like, oh my God. And then under alleged environmental reasons, we shut down our energy that we had. So here's the thing. Politics, unfortunately, of the country. Let's go through this real quick, and I got to get out of here. 24 states, they tend to be more conservative, agricultural friendly states that have pushed legislation. This is not happening it's not happened in the state of New York, for instance, right?
It hasn't happened in the state of Illinois.
Yeah, in the state of Illinois. And so it does flow with politics. It really does appear to be flowing with, if you're a red state, you're probably going to have one of these bills. And if you are a blue state, you're probably not. Isn't that accurate?
It is, but I will say in Indiana, there was not one Democrat that voted against this bill. We had unanimous support of all the Democrats. So again, this was a locomotive coming down the tracks, and it had such broad public support that I don't think and let's face it, I mean, not everything is political R&D. And I really, and on my bill, I had a co-sponsor that was in leadership on the Democrat side, and I really wanted her. She was from Indianapolis. So I had a rural legislator, a suburban legislator, and an urban legislator from both parties as co-sponsors of the bill, because I really wanted to highlight this is not an ag issue. This is a food security issue. And
national security issue.
That helped do that.
Yeah, it's a national security. So here's the thing, okay, and we're gonna get out of this. So 24 states have it. Indiana's probably gonna be 25th. Are you optimistic that come summer this will be?
So we already have law on the book that was in the books that was passed in 2022. This really strengthened that. So we were already one of those 24. And you think about that, they tell me that we were one of the first states to pass something in 22. So this is something that has really caught on in the last couple of years, and it's just most states are looking at this. There were 13 states last year that adopted policies, but there were like 30 states that had legislation introduced.
So it's coming, and that's a good thing. And okay, then last thing, because my listeners say, how bad's the problem? From on press, it doesn't look that bad. Most of the foreign, about 40 million acres, and Kendell used the word number 1.3, roughly 1.1 and a quarter to 1.3 billion agricultural acres in the United States. It's important to note that includes forestry, privately held, not the Bureau of Land Management or National Parks or any of that. There's about then like 900,000 acres, 900 million acres that are agricultural, and a lot that includes the range, et cetera. So 1.3 billion total, about 360 million make the food. So that's the big thing, that only 360 of the 1.3 billion, only 360 million make the food. And that's where I think the bigger concern really is. Then all of a sudden you talk about, they let the Chinese control Smithfield and the pork. What about then if they control the corn, soybeans, almonds, rice, cotton, whatever?
Yeah, absolutely. That's, again, once they get a foothold and see, most people aren't even aware, I don't think, of the Smithfield situation. I mean, in agriculture circles we are, but just the common consumer, they don't understand that.
Doesn't realize there's four producers of processors of pork, and one of the main four that control 80+%. The four control 80+% of all pork. One of those four is Chinese.
Right, exactly. And so the other part of this is just to bring an awareness with the public. And what I'm finding out is they maybe don't know all the details, but they know that influence from adversarial countries is not good for the U.S. and for our national security. And they're going to be supportive of most anything. Now, I will say you have to remove the emotion a little bit from this issue when you're making policy, because it's really easy just to say, no, everybody's out. And then you have to determine who's adversary and who's not. And so we don't want to make rash decisions, but I would say time is of the essence of this type of legislation to get this through, because this now it's on the governor's desk in Indiana. It was put on there 2 days ago, so he has 5 days to sign this, but it doesn't take effect until July 1st, which is a typical date in Indiana for legislation to take. Think about these 11 companies. If they could get them under the wire by July the 1st, we're going to have 11 Chinese companies in Indiana.
11 Chinese companies that own real estate, and it could be as innocuous as a strip mall, or it could be something way worse. And I think you and I both think that it's not innocuous, that it's much worse.
Correct. Yes.
Okay, we're going to have the law. When I get back to Indiana this spring, are we going to have the law?
I'm confident. I talked to the governor's office yesterday. He signed. He received about 200 bills, and he signed all but I think 6.
This is one of the 6,
and this is one of the 6 that has not been signed yet. The governor chairs in India. He appoints and chairs the Indiana Economic Development Commission, and so I know they see this is problematic to them, is limiting development, and it does limit development. I mean, that's the whole point of this.
The other
saying we are limiting development.
If this is if this is one of a couple out of 200 bills that don't get signed, one is going to be able to say, well, wait a minute, how big of an influence financially does China have on our governor? And then that brings up a whole host of other things. So you and I might be revisiting.
We do the positive part of this in Indiana. It just takes a simple majority vote of each, the House and the Senate, to override a governor's veto. So if we can be called back, if it is vetoed, when it passes unanimously, we certainly would have the votes to override that.
Awesome. So it's going to be a law. And now it makes me wonder even more about our governor in Indiana, which I'm not a fan of. So anyway, that's a different story for a different day. Damian Mason here coming at you with Kendell Culp. In case you want to look him up, he's a state representative from Jasper County, Northwest Indiana. He's also the only farmer in the Indiana General Assembly, and I'm so grateful for coming on to talk about this. Let's maybe consider revisiting this or any other topics because we can extrapolate this to a whole bunch of other states besides just Indiana, and that's the cool thing.
Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. My pleasure to join you today, Damian.
Thanks for being here. So next time, he's Kendell Culp. We talked about foreign ownership and the problem that it presents and how can we limit it. And you know what? I really appreciate a bunch of you asked me to cover this topic, and we just did. So thanks for being here. Till next time, I'm Damian Mason, and this is The Business of Agriculture. Well, that concludes another fantastic episode of The Business of Agriculture. This episode was brought to you by Pattern Ag. You know, everybody in agriculture understands the importance of soil health. We also keep an eye on our soil better than we ever did through advanced soil testing. But what if there was a company that provided predictive analytics, not just checking out nutrients and all the elements that are in there, but also could tell you the degree of risk you face with disease and pest pressure? That's right, Pattern Ag can do that. They actually can tell you, hey, you're going to have a real issue here. You can proactively treat for corn rootworm or cyst nematode or sudden death syndrome before the problem actually starts costing you yield. Go to pattern.ag, that's www.pattern.ag, to find the nearest rep that can help you start doing better for your soil.